Namah Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swamin Ite Namani.
I came to realize that Prabhupada's act of writing was very deep and very significantly considered. Every single word he put was not whimsical in any way. It wasn't like I'm talking now. It was very different than what you might have assumed when he wrote. Now, I know in some of the Krishna book tapes that are out, there's a lot more flowing, because Prabhupada was, I think, in that sense, telling a story that was from the verses. It was a story, and he would give commentary on it. But it was very much in a story-like mood. Whereas in the Bhagavatam, or whichever book he was doing, it was quite different, because he was teaching at the same time. And he was considering this book to be very, very significant and important. So I found very early on, when transcribing Prabhupada, to understand this better, it's important to know what it means to transcribe. It's not that you just simply hear some words and you start typing with your fingers, because only some of it was in English. A lot of it was in Bengali or Sanskrit. And to hear, you're hearing now. Let's say you've never heard a verse before, and you hear it in Sanskrit, and you've got to put it on the paper. Now, I don't know if people ever thought about that, but that's like a big job. And so Prabhupada had many books. One of the books he might have been using for the actual verses, and that might have had purports in it. They all had purports in it. Some of the books he used were from the Gaudiya Math, from Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Prabhupada's translations and commentaries. Other were from Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, and then there was a big book that had 8 acharyas' commentaries in. Now, this was a big thing. Each canto was big, thick. So when he would be speaking, you had to not only hear what he said in English, but you had to hear it in Sanskrit or Bengali, and you had to know where it came from so you could properly transcribe it, because you never heard these verses before either. So when I first started, the first thing I had to face when transcribing, before I even got to the Sanskrit Bengali difficulty, obstacle, which was sometimes huge, was that Prabhupada was using these Ewer dictaphones. And they had a remote, kind of like remote, or a handpiece where you would push it and the microphone was in that handpiece. So you have not only the button, but you have the movement of an analog microphone, which was very sensitive to motion and stuff like this. It was a really good one, but still. So every time Prabhupada clicked the button, in actuality, the recording would start some half second after the button get pushed, and it would stop as soon as you release the button. So he had a rhythm which he used for his coordination between his finger and his mouth. And this rhythm was such that he no longer thought about the device in his hand. It was just a given. And he was simply thinking about what it was he was going to say. But the effect was that you would end up with like this. If you're going to say, for example, Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, you would get Krishna is the Supreme Personality of God, or something like that. And now let's go on to another part, that sometimes he would only say one word. I once sat many times, not just once, outside his door as he was writing, dictating. I would just sit there and listen in the middle of the night. And because I loved it, because I was intimate with the act of creation in as much as I got the first tape and I had to type it. So I would listen. And then I would hear him speak. And once it went on for like minutes. And I'm like, wow, what happened? And I was stunned that the amount of time between these words was sometimes very long. So when he would say "and," for example, all you would really hear with the click on, click off is "dip." Sometimes I would hear "ja," "it," "di," "ah," "oh," and there were different sounds. It wasn't just "and," it was a pile of different words. And he would take so long to think of that particular word because he wanted to get it precise. Because he didn't go back over it. This was his one chance to do it right. And he took great pride in what he wrote. This was his life's work. So he took great pride in it, as anyone would, but especially him, he took great pride in it. So he wanted to say it perfectly. But the problem was that the word that he took 5 seconds to think of sounded to me, who's supposed to transcribe it. So what I did was I very carefully would examine the context of the sentence once I actually pieced it together, because sometimes that happened 3 or 4 times in a sentence. And I would learn what those fragments were. I would learn what word those fragments were. And when I was very confident I had it good, I went to Prabhupada and I said, I'm going to read you this sentence. You tell me what you think. I didn't tell him why. I said, blah, 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 blah. He said, yes. So? I said, no, fine. So I actually got it, what those little fragments were. Very difficult. And sometimes they weren't, I couldn't get it perfect because I don't know whether it was right or wrong. I thought it was. And so then you would hit this Sanskrit. Now, sometimes of these 10 different purports you could refer to, one in one book, one in another book, and the 8 in the other. And I also knew what book he had on his desk because I put it there. So if it was, for example, Chaitanya Charitamrita, where he was just using the Gaudiya Math version, piece of cake, because I knew where to find the quotes in the purports. Very easy. But if he had multiple books, which was most of the time, so what you have to do is hear it, memorize what he's saying, and then look to find that pattern in all of the Sanskrit and Bengali for 8 different acharyas for this one verse. And sometimes, especially like Sanatana Goswami, he sometimes had 10 pages of commentary. I mean, Sanskrit pages, 10. Thick, black, 10. Not all the time. Some were like paragraphs, but so it would take long time to figure it out. And sometimes it wasn't there. It wasn't in any of the books. So then I gave up. Then I said, I can't handle this. So I go to Prabhupada. I said, you said this. Where is that from? And he would say, that's from over there. And I go, run back there, find it. Yep, there it is. Now, that's phenomenal. I'd like to also talk about other people who had spoken about Prabhupada's Sanskrit capacities and stuff, but that's phenomenal. that he knew where he got that from. And these were not those usual quotes that everybody knows nowadays. And these are very esoteric. Some of them were quite esoteric. Of course, yeah, after a while, everybody knows all of them because they're knowing what was at that time. Never heard that before. So he knew where they were. And he helped. But once, he didn't know it either. It took me 1 week. That's what I had mentioned before. 1 week to find that quote. Because if you don't have it, you can't type it. And if you don't know where it is, the Sanskrit people can't double check your transliteration. Because when you're transcribing, you also have to do transliterations. Because they don't want to do it. They're doing other stuff. So I had to find it, properly transliterate it, and then they would put the diacritic marks because I didn't have time for all that junk. I mean, it was phenomenal, the process of writing these books. I mean, for me, when I said on the beach that your books are just getting better all the time, and he said, do you think so? I said, it's amazing, because I was the one typing them, and I saw it happening in my eyes, saw it right in front of me that it was getting better and better and better. I was just amazed. He was very happy. For him, that was the greatest compliment, not these other things which people generally said, oh, you're so wonderful, blah, blah, blah. I said, these are getting better and better all the time. He was just beaming because that was his life's work. And I remember when we were doing the universe thing, and that was a whole nother story, but related to Sanskrit, somebody brought up this Sanskrit scholar from Udupi. He was really a big-time Sanskrit scholar. So he was giving his ideas of what the fifth canto verses were supposed to mean. And he was talking about some Sanskrit thing. And then Prabhupada said, very humbly, he said, oh, actually, I thought it meant this. And that man was stunned. He just shut up immediately, stunned. He couldn't say a word. He just looked down. He was it's like all of a sudden something blew up in his head that, oh my God, that's right. So then from that point on, whenever somebody would say something about Prabhupada's scholarship, I said that, yes, but in the real world of interaction and scholarship, many times these scholars found that they didn't know as much. And I found that to be very significant.